Jung discovered something that still makes psychologists uncomfortable today. True awakening is not peaceful. It is not blissful. It is a catastrophe that terrifies everyone around you. In his theoretical framework, developed during his most prolific period, he documented 7 unmistakable signs that reveal when someone has genuinely awakened versus those who are simply pretending. These signs are so disturbing that he called them a protocol, a warning system, because when you see all 7 signs in a person, you are not looking at someone who has found enlightenment. You are looking at someone who has become psychologically dangerous to the collective unconscious. But here is what made Jung's blood run cold. The truly awakened do not announce themselves. They do not seek followers or validation. They simply exist in a way that makes the sleeping world deeply uncomfortable. Today I will show you the exact 7 signs Jung identified, why he considered this knowledge dangerous, and what happens when someone completes this terrifying transformation. This is not about spiritual bypassing or Instagram enlightenment. This is about a psychological state so rare and so threatening that society will actively work to destroy anyone who reaches it. Consider a case profile that illustrates Jung's first discovery. We see this dynamic clearly in the story of a man who arrived at a clinical setting, appearing normal, even charming. He had a successful career, a family, and by all social standards, seemed well adjusted. But something became apparent during the initial consultation. The patient no longer cared what the therapist thought of him, not in a rebellious way, not in an angry way. He simply existed beyond the need for approval or judgment. This was the first sign in Jung's framework, the complete disintegration of the persona. The persona is the mask we wear to navigate society. It is the version of yourself you present to get approval, avoid conflict, and maintain social bonds. Most people believe their persona is who they actually are. They have worn the mask so long they forgot there is a face underneath. But the truly awakened person has watched their persona dissolve completely. They can still function socially when needed, but they no longer identify with the performance. Jung's writings describe how individuals in this state experience social interactions like watching a play they are no longer invested in. They can follow the script perfectly, but they feel no attachment to their role. This is why awakened people make others so uncomfortable. They have become mirrors that reflect back your own performance. When you speak to them, you can feel them seeing through your persona to the real person underneath. Most people find this unbearable. They accuse the awakened person of being cold, judgmental, or detached, but the awakened person is not judging. They have simply stopped playing the game, and their presence reminds you that you are still performing. Jung observed something even more disturbing in these patterns. When the persona disintegrates, the person stops caring about social validation entirely. They exist in complete neutrality toward how others perceive them. This creates massive anxiety in groups because humans are wired to care about social status. An awakened person who genuinely does not care cannot be controlled through shame, guilt, or social pressure. They have become immune to the very mechanisms that keep collective unconsciousness functioning. Time 0.6. The person who has disintegrated their persona becomes almost invisible to social hierarchies. They attend gatherings, but register no emotional response to status games. This indifference is not contempt. It is genuine freedom from the need to be seen in any particular way. But that is not the most disturbing part. The second sign Jung identified was even more psychologically threatening. The awakened person has accepted their shadow completely. They know with absolute certainty that they are capable of every evil they see in others. This is not self-hatred. This is radical self-knowledge. A composite example based on Jung's observed patterns shows how individuals in this state can discuss their capacity for cruelty, manipulation, and violence with the same calm they would use to discuss the weather. The awakened person has stopped running from darkness. They have looked directly at every dark impulse, every selfish desire, every capacity for destruction within themselves, and said, yes, this is also me. This creates a terrifying calmness. They cannot be shocked by human evil because they recognize it in themselves. They cannot be manipulated through moral superiority because they have abandoned the fantasy of being superior. Jung noted that this shadow integration makes awakened people seem almost alien to others. When someone confesses a dark thought or shameful act, most people respond with judgment or false reassurance. The awakened person responds with recognition. They know that darkness intimately because they have made peace with it in themselves. This is why people often confess things to awakened individuals they would never tell anyone else. There is no judgment to fear because the awakened person has already judged and accepted the same darkness within themselves. But accepting the shadow does not make someone evil. It makes them conscious. They can choose their actions deliberately rather than being unconsciously driven by repressed content. The truly dangerous people, Jung realized, are those who believe they have no shadow. They commit atrocities while maintaining complete conviction in their own righteousness. The awakened person who knows their shadow can act with genuine morality because they have consciously chosen it rather than unconsciously performing it. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. The third sign appears as a paradox. The awakened person often withdraws from society, but not because they are depressed. They withdraw because the noise of the sleeping world has become unbearable. Let's look at a narrative illustration. An individual in this psychological state describes feeling physically exhausted after spending time in groups. The unconscious agreements, the unspoken games, the collective delusions required constant energy to navigate. Solitude was not escape, it was necessary restoration. This withdrawal terrifies people because it looks like mental illness. Family members panic, friends stage interventions. But the awakened person is not withdrawing from connection. They are withdrawing from performance. They have just stopped participating in the collective theater of unconsciousness. This creates profound loneliness because most human interaction is built on shared unconsciousness. Jung observed that awakened people often create very small circles of genuine connection rather than large networks of shallow relationships. They value depth over breadth. One conversation with someone who is also conscious means more than 100 interactions with people still performing their personas. This selectivity gets labeled as arrogance or superiority, but it is actually radical honesty. The awakened person has stopped pretending that unconscious relationships are fulfilling. They would rather be alone than fake connection. But here is where it gets truly dangerous. The fourth sign Jung identified was the loss of projection. The awakened person has stopped blaming others for their experience of reality. When something bothers them about another person, they immediately ask what this reveals about themselves. This makes them impossible to manipulate through victimhood or guilt. Most people live in constant projection. They blame their parents for their problems, their partners for their unhappiness, their circumstances for their limitations. The awakened person has stopped projecting. If they are unhappy, they ask what they need to change internally. This does not mean they tolerate abuse. It means they respond consciously rather than reactively. Jung noted that this loss of projection creates massive discomfort in relationships. When you try to make an awakened person responsible for your feelings, they simply refuse. Not aggressively, not defensively. They just will not carry your projection. They reflect it back to you clearly and without judgment, forcing you to confront your own responsibility. Most people find this intolerable. They accuse the awakened person of being cold or uncaring, but the awakened person has simply stopped participating in unconscious emotional contracts. Imagine trying to guilt-trip someone who takes full responsibility for their own emotional experience. You say they hurt you. They ask, what within you is hurt and why? You say they made you angry. They ask, what triggered your anger and what it reveals about your unmet needs? You say they are being difficult. They remain calm and curious about your reaction. This is infuriating to someone who wants to project their inner chaos onto another person. The awakened person becomes like a mirror that reflects everything back to its source. The fifth sign is perhaps the most socially devastating. Society labels the awakened as mentally ill. Jung's theoretical framework documents how genuinely awakened individuals often get diagnosed with disorders simply because they no longer fit the collective delusion. They question consensus reality. They see through social constructs. This looks like psychosis to those still asleep. Think about what normal means. It means fitting into collective unconsciousness. An awakened person who no longer shares these delusions appears crazy by definition. Jung understood this was not a bug in the system. It was a feature. The collective unconscious protects itself by pathologizing those who threaten it. This creates a profound double bind for awakened people. If they speak their truth openly, they risk being institutionalized or medicated into compliance. If they hide their consciousness to appear normal, they experience deep inauthenticity that eats at them daily. Most people choose a middle path. They learn to speak the language of the sleeping world when necessary, while maintaining their true awareness privately. This is not deception. It is strategic survival. Jung called it conscious adaptation versus unconscious conformity. The awakened person learns to code switch between worlds. At work, they use the approved language and follow the social scripts. At home, they allow themselves to see clearly. They become bilingual in consciousness, speaking both the language of sleep and the language of awakening. This skill keeps them functional, but also deepens their isolation. They are always translating, always bridging between worlds that do not understand each other. The sixth sign relates to emotional autonomy. The awakened person can no longer be emotionally manipulated or gaslit. When someone tries to tell them they did not experience what they experienced, the awakened person simply observes the manipulation attempt without being moved by it. This makes them terrifying to anyone who relies on emotional control. This emotional autonomy develops through shadow work. When you have fully acknowledged your own capacity for manipulation, you recognize it instantly in others. This creates an impenetrable psychological boundary. Manipulators cannot find purchase. Their usual tactics simply do not work. But this emotional autonomy does not make awakened people heartless. They can feel deep empathy without taking on others' suffering as their own. They can offer support without becoming enmeshed. This kind of bounded compassion confuses people who mistake healthy boundaries for coldness. We see this dynamic clearly in relationship patterns. A family member tries the old manipulation tactics that worked for decades. The guilt trips, the emotional blackmail, the selective memory of events. The awakened person listens calmly, acknowledges the feelings being expressed, but does not absorb the projected responsibility. They remain centered in their own reality. This feels like betrayal to the manipulator. How dare you not participate in the dysfunction anymore? How dare you remember events accurately instead of accepting my version? How dare you remain calm when I am trying to create chaos? The seventh and final sign is what Jung called the return. After the withdrawal, after the shadow integration, the awakened person eventually returns to the world. But they do not return to fit in. They return to observe. They can function in society, hold jobs, maintain relationships, but they do it from awareness rather than identification. Jung observed that this return is the most dangerous phase. The awakened person now has all their gifts integrated. They can read people with supernatural accuracy. They see manipulation patterns before they form. An awakened person with malicious intent would be devastating. An awakened person with compassionate intent becomes what Jung called a culture carrier. But here is what makes the truly awakened dangerous to the collective unconscious. They cannot be controlled. Social pressure does not work on them. Shame does not move them. Status games do not interest them. Emotional manipulation slides off them. The usual mechanisms that keep people conforming to collective delusions have no power over someone who has completed individuation. This is why groups instinctively try to destroy awakened individuals. Not consciously, not deliberately, but the collective unconscious recognizes a threat and mobilizes to eliminate it. Jung's theoretical framework shows how awakened individuals often become scapegoats in their families, workplaces, and communities. They get blamed for problems they did not create. They get accused of causing discomfort they are merely reflecting. They get pushed out of systems they were trying to help. This is not personal. This is the collective unconscious protecting itself from consciousness. An awakened person in a family reveals all the unspoken dysfunctions. An awakened person in a workplace exposes all the collective delusions. An awakened person in a community threatens all the shared unconscious agreements that keep the group functioning. This is why Jung considered this knowledge dangerous. When you recognize these 7 signs in yourself, you cannot go back to unconsciousness. You cannot pretend you do not see what you see. You cannot perform the persona you have outgrown. You become marked by consciousness in a world that rewards unconsciousness. You become a threat to collective delusion simply by existing authentically. This is the burden of awakening. You gain radical freedom and radical isolation simultaneously. But Jung also discovered something beautiful in his decades of psychological research. Those who completed this transformation reported a depth of meaning and authenticity that unconscious people never experience. They might be lonely, but they are never alone with themselves. They might